Alrighty, welcome to the Excitable Soul Podcast, everybody. Here we're interested in all things purpose. We want to know where and how people find meaning and connection in their lives. In every episode, we will be hearing the real life stories of how people have uncovered, understood, and unleashed their own unique sense of purpose. Our hope is that we can all learn from the journeys of our guests so that we can all better find a sense of purpose in our own lives. I'm host James Glover, performance coach and purpose nerd. I'm incredibly excited to be exploring these stories with you. So let's get going, shall we? Today's guest is Dr. Mackenzie Cramblit, a transformational leadership coach and facilitator. She brings a rare combination of the strategic and the soulful to her work. Spanning 15 years of experience across behavioral sciences, management consulting, and coaching, she has led global research across programs in Cameroon, the Netherlands, Scotland, and Togo in West Africa. She's published research on environmental stewardship, international development, and urban health and well-being. Mackenzie has also co-authored groundbreaking research with McKinsey & Company on economic recovery, talent retention, and inclusion. She has directly influenced and advised Fortune 500 executives on growth strategy, M&A, culture change, and product innovation across financial services, customer goods, and the pharmaceutical sector. Her coaching work centers on creating the inner freedom needed to unleash full potential by helping leaders reset and rebuild for their next chapter without sacrificing ambition. This was a wonderfully open conversation, honestly exploring shared ideas and perspectives. I really hope you enjoy. Welcome, Mackenzie, to the Excitable Soul Podcast. Wonderful to have you with us today. How are you feeling?
So glad to be here, James. Thank you so much.
We should probably just kind of start our conversation by explaining to people that this is literally the first time that we're meeting. We've had a few interactions over LinkedIn, and it was kind of like high energy. Oh, you're into this, I'm into this too. Like, you think this, yeah, I think that too. Like, and it was kind of one of those where we're like, hey, we should just get to know each other in an open forum. So
Yes,
here we are,
yes, absolutely.
basically getting to know one another on a podcast.
Yes, I'm thrilled about it. And I have to say, LinkedIn has been a great venue for making adult friends recently. Under the guise of business, obviously, but yeah, it's pretty exciting.
So making some lifelong connections, just basically being able to find those people that are kind of seeing the world in a similar way to you are.
Yeah. And, have the algorithm to thank for that. But also, I think you and I mentioned this when we first connected. The word soul is something like a pass key on LinkedIn, where some people have it, some people get it. And as soon as you see that word, I usually assume that someone has a level of depth and just adventurousness. And so I always want to reach out.
Yeah, and I think it'd be really cool for us to just explore that for a little moment. How do you, before everybody that listens to this podcast knows that we nerd out on purpose and everything associated with purpose. And for me, there's kind of an expression of purposefulness that's just in the word soul. So let's not even get distracted by everything else. Let's kind of start there first. What does that word mean and represent to you? And what's your journey with it? Where and how do you connect to it and use it?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think there's something about the sonority of the word that just conveys this sense of spaciousness and um, depth to it. And for me, it has something to do with kind of the pulse of our life, like this inborn propulsion towards something.
Yeah.
And that the soul is the level at which we understand that about ourselves, or the level at which we engage in life toward the highest expression of ourselves.
Yeah.
And for many years, we might wander around through life, not really connecting with that part of ourselves or really understanding what's going on. And yet the soul is sort of leading us to some experience that sooner or later will wake us up to the reality of who we are.
Yeah.
And so it has kind of a life of its own and its own agenda
Yeah.
for who we become. And I'm kind of reminded of, there's a book by Michael Meade called Fate and Destiny. And in it, he writes about how fate is sort of the imprint of life on our soul when we come into the world. It's like the thing that we're kind of inevitably designed to do, and destiny is how we internalize that as a mission and live
Yeah.
it out. So there's an element um, of choice and saying yes to the mission in destiny and agency. And I think the soul is really at the intersection of those two.
I mean, come on! Like, let's just stop there. We were kind of laughing before we even started. You were kind of like saying, "Hey, you know what? I can go deep pretty quick. I can get into a proper conversation fairly fast." And that's such a wonderful, wonderful place to start in terms of this kind of intersection of fate and destiny, and actually the kind of the soul being central to all of that. And I love this language of kind of it's the highest expression of ourselves. There's the kind of the language that I really connect to is the Aristotle quote of "We are greater than the sum of our parts."
Mm.
There's kind of a magic to being a human being that we don't necessarily give ourselves credit for, or don't take the time to really investigate and experience often, or necessarily see in others. And that magic, both individually, you being greater than the sum of your parts, but also
Mm.
when you put a group of people together, how we can be the greater than the sum of those parts, and so on and so forth, as you kind of build into society level, and cultural level within organizations or countries, or globally. The magic and the possibility that happens when you understand and you see and you feel that, like, that feels like soul to
Oh,
me. And so
absolutely.
so this idea of being the highest expression of ourselves, like, there's just total coherence there. I totally get where you're coming from.
Yeah, it's so interesting you mentioned society because I'm an anthropologist by training, and sociologists, who are sort of like the forebears of cultural anthropology, um, that's exactly how they define society as a collective group, that it's more than the sum of individuals that make it up. There's something that happens when people
Yeah,
come together. It's like this higher valence of being and um, expression. And so I just love that you reminded us that in a society, in a culture, in an organization, there's always something happening sort of within and above or beyond the individuals.
yeah,
And I think when we become aware of that, we have to take responsibility for the way that we're contributing to that thing,
mm,
and not just take it as, a given or inevitable. And what I see as an opportunity for organizations, and I know you work with leaders in organizations, is just a higher level of consciousness
yeah.
and responsibility around the collectives that we contribute to.
Yeah, and I love that you just said that same word twice there, which I think is like critical for us to own in this conversation, which is responsibility. Like, if you start to acknowledge that actually we're greater than the sum of our parts, and what that then means in terms of possibility for you, the individual, and the contribution that you could make, there is something about how you feel valued in that exchange. But then
Mm,
there is also something about your responsibility to others in order to be able to make a contribution and see the contribution of others, or enable the contribution of others. So the kind of the reciprocity in that interaction actually is really powerful, and it's palpable. People know it, right? Because
mhm,
they can feel it, um, both good and bad. Like, if we just hold that tension, because there's plenty of examples in the world right now where actually the greater the sum of our parts is not equaling positive outcomes. It's actually
mhm,
it's equaling narrowness, or diminishment in some
mm,
regards. So that idea of responsibility and choice, like agency, who do I want to be in this? How do I want to show up? What do I want to be a part of? Are all things that we need to hold on to.
mhm. You probably know the English writer Greg McKeown, And I'm just obsessed with this idea that I, gravitated to on my own, but then saw him write about it in Essentialism in just such a clear way. And it's the idea that the most important decision we make in life is to choose choice
Mm.
and simply to step into a relationship of agency and responsibility in relation to the world and to others. Um, in the moment we're in, which seems to extend forever, right? Like, when has there been a time in human history where people weren't overwhelmed with the pace of change?
Yeah.
In like 1804, it was trains, and here we are. And I think with that, there is a there is an ask of us to process more complexity, to host more of the world, in the words
Yeah.
of Thomas Hubel. And so there's a responsibility to grow ourselves in the capacity to do that, to process more, to hold more complexity. Yeah, and so, I think sometimes people feel, self-conscious or guilty about stepping back from the world or taking a break or opting out for a period of time, but I do think it's self-responsible to do that if it enables you to stay related to the world.
Yeah.
Um, and not to say that we all need to tap out, and stop paying attention. But if that's what it takes for a period of time for you to then be able to come back and take conscious action and contribute, then I think that that's a healthy thing to do, right?
Yeah.
That's a way of serving the greater good.
Yeah, massively. And I can't help but reflect on a program I was watching last night with my wife. I don't know whether in the US you've come across Jeremy Clarkson. Jeremy
Mm-mm.
Clarkson's pretty famous in the UK as a presenter. He hosted a program called Top Gear for many years, which was very much about cars and all things kind of petrol head. And then he moved across to Amazon and to Prime, and they had a big show on there. But 4 years ago, he started a program about the farm in the Cotswolds that he bought. And his absolute ineptitude at farming, like he'd never done farming before. He, just thought it was a great idea. And this TV show has shone a light on the plight of farming in this country, and just the sheer investment of time, energy, and money that
Mm.
these individuals invest in the production of food, and the challenges that they face. So much so that the Irish government gave him a commendation because they hadn't seen anything be able to speak to the challenges that they faced in the way that this program had, with great humor and hilarity, because he's in his 60s and completely inept as far as this is concerned. But he was on the latest series. He was talking about the Great British Pub, the Village Pub, and as part of kind of his endeavours to be able to try and take farm to fork, so the kind of the produce immediately from the land to the consumer, he was looking at kind of a restaurant and a local pub, and the numbers of these that have closed over the course of the last 20 years has been absolutely colossal. But he was sat there and he was talking about, if you think about a village and a village community, we don't often have local shops anymore because most people are going to the supermarkets, so they're closing. We don't have a local policeman within a village anymore because they've been moved out to bigger constabularies. You don't necessarily have the same postman who works your village and does for 30 years. You don't have the same doctor or GP that just works within your village. The schools, the local schools are getting too small and don't have the intake, so they're closing, so people are having to travel further. And he was just talking about this kind of dismantling of all of the different elements that create the opportunity for people to come together in proximity of where they live and create
Mm.
community. And this last bastion being the Great British Pub, and now they're all closing. And he just sat there and said, what we are already the loneliest generations in the history of the human race. What is going to become of us if we continue to remove the opportunities to be able to connect with one another?
Yeah.
And I know that that's kind of a really random example, but as you were just talking about that, there's a need, isn't there? There's a need, a deep human need for other human beings, and
It's
what comes with that.
Yeah, and I'm just so moved by those stories. And I don't know if you caught this about my background, but I actually lived for a year and a half in Scotland in a remote community on the West Coast. And the pub
Wow.
was very central there because it was a place you couldn't access by car. So
Oh,
people would hike or they would take a ferry to visit the pub. And I totally resonate with that sense of like it's the heartbeat of a village or community. Um, and it's unfortunate that with the rise of digital technology, it's almost like we've accepted the trade-off
yeah,
for more diffuse, expansive um, social relationships and connections at the expense of the the very like fleshy local ones, just like being in person with people and experiencing the energy that comes from that.
yeah,
And I think it's very clear that that's what's leading to the loneliness that um, that uh, there's a quote by an internal medicine doctor, Vincent Felitti, that's coming to mind. It's the best definition of addiction I've ever heard, which is that it's hard to get enough of something that almost works. And that seems to me to be just what's happening, where, why are we addicted to TikTok or, other social media? It almost works. It almost satisfies that human urge to be with and
yeah.
to connect.
But it's absent of soul. So
Mm-hmm.
if we kind of go full circle here in
Yeah.
this, it's missing the one ingredient that actually is critical to making the magic happen. It's soulless to some degree, and I
Yeah.
think that idea of it almost working is really brilliant, because I can imagine the people jumping up and down going, yeah, but I cry every day to some of the videos I see on TikTok, that there's like wonderful things happening in the world that I would never know about if I wasn't watching TikTok. And you're like, yeah, good, it almost works. Imagine what it'd be like
Mm-hmm.
if you actually saw some of those wonderful things happening with your own eyes in the real world, or they were happening to you because somebody was able to see you in a different way. And
Yeah.
I was in my local supermarket at the weekend, and there was just this deeply moving moment with this young person who was struggling to purchase something, and you could feel the anxiety. Their card just wasn't working, and I immediately was looking over and looking around, going, is there a parent? Is there an adult with this person? Like, they weren't. It was very small what they were trying to buy, but um, their emotional reaction to not being able to do it, it was just starting to kind of really flood them, and I saw the look in the gentleman who was on the self-service till next to this young person, and he felt it. You could see he
Wow.
felt it. And I turned around, was trying to figure out what was happening for this kid. And this guy was already ahead of me. And he just turned around to him and said, is that all you're trying to get, Sunshine? Is that all? And this young person was immediately like, yeah, don't worry, it's okay. And was trying to walk away from the till with the thing. And he went, no, come here, please. And I just went, go on, just trying to give him a bit of encouragement, because I was kind of the bystander behind. And this gentleman just scanned it and passed it on, and you could see that, like, this young person didn't know what to do with themselves. Like, they
Mm.
said thank you and they walked, but they were kind of almost overwhelmed with relief and a whole bunch of other different emotions that were playing out for them. And I came straight home to my wife and said, I've just witnessed something, just been a part of something that I can't let go of. I can't unsee anymore. Like, the things that it stirred in me of having been this young person before in my own life, having been stood there and having had similar experiences, and then seeing the kind of the generosity of spirit of this other person to to be in it. And then the impacts are just, how do you get that from TikTok?
Beautiful. Right.
How,
I wonder if we're onto a new definition, right? Of that soul or being ensouled requires that you be seen. And there's that reciprocity, right?
yeah,
Um, is it possible unless we're both vulnerable to each other? Um, and what strikes me about that story, I'm just like, my heart is full right now, just putting myself in that shop with you, is the generosity is in paying attention and
yes,
not in the amount that was, given in
yeah,
that situation. And isn't it true that we can be kind of I don't know, hardened to grace
yeah,
and to the possibility that others might want to help us, and that in fact that might be why we're here in the first place, is to help each other.
yeah.
um
And
yeah.
there's that kind of over. I think you're just right, really onto something there. In that, how wonderful would it be if more people were open to that kind of interaction and not feeling some version of I don't want to burden, or the other end of the spectrum, which is to take advantage of. The vast
Hmm.
in the kind of the in the standard deviation curve, and you could probably speak to this with a greater level of educated insight than me. Most people in the middle, and most people are somewhere in the middle, where like actually being seen, truly valued, and there being some level of contribution made, um, would be transformational.
Hmm. And terrifying.
And yeah,
Being seen is
amazing.
terrifying. I think that's why people, in your early relationships, so many things can go wrong, right? Because there's um there's like a musculature in learning how to become vulnerable,
Mm,
and learning that's actually what makes relating, beautiful and a source of growth. And I'm reminded of the, you know, leadership guru, I don't know, for lack of a better term, Simon Sinek. Is his current research is about friendship, and he tells these stories about his own friendships to illustrate the point that we honor someone when we ask for help,
mm,
because that is saying, I trust you to be there for me. I need you.
yeah.
And so we're in this, I think, in our society, and partly, exacerbated by these digital technologies, the one way mirror kind of thing. Um, we forget that part of the beauty of being in relation is being vulnerable to each other, and that it feels really good to be supportive, not just supported.
Yeah. Yeah. And isn't that the thing? Just another example of the wonderful definition of addiction that you're giving us, and especially around social media, in that it is easier to relate in a digital environment where actually it doesn't require the same level of vulnerability that it does um, in physicality. But it's in the effort. It's always in the effort, right? It's always in the effort. It's in the
Hmm.
discomfort that the growth occurs, that the
Hmm.
depth occurs, that the richness occurs, that the genuine, truthful reward actually occurs, and
Yes.
not in the absence of that stretch and of that struggle. And so, if you're not put in a position where you have to embrace the vulnerability, um, it becomes then something that ultimately becomes crippling. You get the exact opposite of what you intend. Oh, I don't want to go do that because it doesn't feel good. And instead, I'm going to make a choice to be over here where it feels safe. I'm going to keep myself safe. But then everything narrows,
Hmm.
everything shrinks, everything becomes smaller. And in actual fact, that sense of vulnerability and fear grows because there is so much beyond what feels safe,
Hmm.
that it then becomes restricting, limiting.
Yeah. Do you know that, in addiction studies, scientists use rats and, various substances to understand reward systems. And what shocked me was learning that it's not just the substances that they give them, whether it's cocaine or sugar or whatever, to study their their seeking behavior. The wheels that the rats use are also in themselves addictive. So even without like an exogenous substance that, like binds to opiate receptors or whatever, um, there there is an addictive tendency when we're given, limited options.
Yeah.
And so I think, if that can speak to human nature, it's the lack of diversity, or it's the lack of being asked to stretch,
Yeah.
to get outside our comfort zone, that keeps us spinning in the same wheel, thinking that that's kind of the best life has to offer.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, it's so sad to me at times. It's inspiring and sort of sad. I work with a lot of high achievers, and I think the people I work with remind me of myself, a couple years ago when I was struggling with the same things. And it's so fascinating to me how the people who have achieved conventional success are the ones who are the best at convincing themselves they don't deserve more. Like they don't get to have a full life where they wake up feeling energized about the day, or even come home on a Friday looking, like actually being full
Mhm.
at the end of a week spent working. And yeah, I guess I think, and part of this is the conversation about soul. I think we're meant for more.
Mhm.
And it's to our detriment that we assume um, our options are limited, and that, we just have the wheel to run in, and
Yeah.
there's not this wider world to explore.
Yeah. I was immediately struck by um, that sense of I've achieved a whole bunch of things. I've realized that maybe those things aren't serving me, and now I don't feel like I deserve the other things, the things that are actually meaningful, the things that come from the inside out.
Hmm.
And I'm really wondering if you could just speak to that experience a little bit. Like, uh, the extreme cynical voice is one of, well, if you've achieved all of this, then why in God's name would you not think that you're entitled to that? Or some of the variant of it. I don't necessarily represent the cynical voice very well. I sit the other side of the fence most of the time, but I'm intrigued by that mindset almost.
Hmm.
What's happening in there?
So when it, like, just building on that, I mean, imagine imagine someone who's like a principal or a managing director in private equity or consulting. They're making multiples more in income than the average person. You would think that this is someone who would have no problem giving themselves permission to enjoy life, right?
Hmm.
Their assets afford that enjoyment and luxury even. And yet, these are often the same people who deny themselves the wealth of a life well lived. And so we have people who, appear outwardly successful, and yet they're kind of half dead,
Hmm.
kind of wandering around life, not truly fulfilled or not truly connected. And I think we all suffer because of that. If you think about the knock on effects of, you know, living as a zombie,
Yeah.
kind of half alive in your own life, your family's impacted by that, your romantic partner, your work colleagues, because they're not getting the best of you. Your community is not getting the best of you in service. The
Hmm.
world is um, the world is denied the, the the genius that you are here to contribute because you haven't owned it yourself.
Yeah.
And so I think at the core of this is the movement of self-permission.
Mm.
And that is what I try to help my clients develop. I always say that I'm not going to be the one who cracks the eggshell for them. Like God is going to do that or life is going to do that. But when they feel broken open and they're ready for change, that's when people tend to find a coach
Yeah.
or start going to therapy or whatever. They tend to start opening themselves to support.
Yeah.
And so it's at those moments of vulnerability, which is possibility, that I think the most transformational work can happen.
Yeah, and you know what? I'd love to come back to this because I know this is kind of born out of personal experience for you. But before we kind of dive into the kind of the pain point, I guess I'm interested in how you come to being in the work that you're in now, and what are some of the experiences that have shaped who you are in the world right now, and that have opened you up to the possibility of soulfulness in a way that if you kind of maybe take a career history, you'd be like, no, I'm one of those people. What? So
Exactly.
what are some of those that have kind of aggregated together to bring you here?
I think there's some pieces before this era of my life that make more sense as a story looking backwards.
Yeah.
Um, and probably 5 years from now, I'll figure out the meaning of where I am now. Steve Jobs said we connect the dots backwards. And I think, that's true. We need a certain amount of distance
Yeah.
to be able to perceive the meaning in something. But I have been a multi career pivoter. So I studied French literature and economics in college. I loved French from a young age. And at the age of 10, I started attending these summer camps. In the US, we have this like tradition of going away to summer camp, sleeping away from mom and dad. And so I would learn French at this camp during the summer. And some of the counselors were Cameroonian,
Oh wow.
Senegalese,
Yeah.
Martiniquais, Quebecois, French speakers from all around the world who would be flown in to teach this camp. And so I was very fortunate to grow up with that global experience, even on a small scale. And from a young age, I became attached to this one counselor named Yanni, and he was from Cameroon, and he was studying history at university there. And it was as if I made this vow to myself that I would one day visit him in Cameroon. I'd one day go there. And I kind of forgot about that for many years. But then it was in probably my second or third year of university where I started thinking about it again. And I applied for a grant from the US State Department, and I spent a year in Cameroon studying agriculture and rural development
Oh
in the
wow.
Muslim French speaking region of Cameroon. And that was hugely like formative for me. I reconnected with Yanni, met many other friends I consider family today, and and then I started a PhD in cultural anthropology, and so that was I would consider my first pivot. Is like I didn't have a background in
What
cultural
what
anthropology.
what was the French passion? Where did that emerge for you?
I'm not sure. I think I've always been drawn to music, and I was a choral singer from a very young age. You all have a very storied tradition of choral music in the UK, um, and so I think the musicality of the French language probably appealed to me,
Mm.
and it was something that I was good at without trying too hard. And there was an element of immersion language learning that's very theatrical because when you don't understand the words, you have to use a lot of gestures. You have to really act things out. There's a lot of singing, there's dancing, there's theatrics. The counselors were super weird. They, tattooed and, piercings and stuff. And of course, like I wanted to be like them. And so there was this sense of vibrancy there, and it was a wonderful place to be away from. In my case, mom. I was raised by a single mom, so just feeling the contours of my world expanding,
Yeah.
um, and And then I think cultural anthropology just draws on this kind of innate curiosity about people, um, even as like a 3-year-old or 3, 4, 5. I would go up to strangers and sort of like tug on their jacket and be like, "Hey, do you have a girlfriend? What color's the rug in your bedroom?" And I would just ask these like intensely personal questions because I was just fascinated by how people lived. And studying that gave me
How
permission
big are your
to.
shoes?
Yeah, exactly. Some people thought I was cute, some people maybe less so. But yeah, I'm sure my mom apologized on my behalf. Um,
Brilliant, brilliant. And so, when you're talking about the Steve Jobs quote, which I adore and use that often, because in the work that we do at the Excitable Soul around purpose immersion, the first thing is this kind of journey of discovery. It's about uncovering the things that are really meaningful to us, and in order to do that, we have to go back in time, because that's
yeah,
Steve Jobs, right? That's how we connect the dots. And you were talking before about being able to make sense of where you are now by giving it 5 years and then being able to look back.
yeah,
So when you look back now on those moments of this kind of passionate connection to the French language, and then this kind of experience within camp, and then this move out into Cameroon and the kind of research that's associated. What's the meaning and insight that you now see and understand about those experiences and how they shaped you that maybe you didn't know at the time?
I think the meaning is something in. Um, so in anthropology, we talk about the tension between the particular and the general. So constantly sort of shuttling between understanding the details of life or a culture or a village, and how that becomes generalizable or universally human. And I think my life has probably traced that same contrast,
Mm.
where I get intensely interested in people and then I want to understand the context that shaped them. And probably a sense of like being an explorer from a young age. And I think now as a coach, the piece that I haven't figured out how to make meaning of is, why am I drawn to working with individuals in this, deep, almost archaeological way of, understanding where they come from, and what their heart's deepest desires are and where they're blocked and where they're going. Um, that kind of dyad relationship, I haven't really figured out why I arrived here from studying villages, towns, societies, um, and then the world of business. I spent 6 years in management consulting, so
Yeah.
working on organizational and global scales as well. Um, yeah, so I don't know if coaching will make sense to me in a few years' time, or if it's just kind of the means by which I'm meant to serve in this phase of my life.
Yeah.
Um, that there's a sense of depth to it and specificity, right? The specificity of a life. And what's rewarding about that is being part of the team of people and supports in someone's life that help them become who they're meant to be, or who they were always meant to be.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think there's something different about that than just like writing a book that millions of people will read. And maybe that will happen someday. Um, but coaching is so intimate in that way, and yet it doesn't make it less impactful at scale.
Yeah.
It's almost deceptively intimate, because of course that person you're working with goes out and they touch the world in their own way. Maybe they're the author who's writing a book for millions, or they're making decisions as a leader that impact thousands of employees and hundreds of thousands of customers.
Yeah.
So I think that's the piece that I haven't figured out how to square yet. But I trust that this is where I'm meant to be.
And I'm now wondering if we kind of go back to the conversation around soul and this kind of intersect of fate and destiny, and the sense of kind of agency that gives you. And I'm wondering whether or not actually part of the experience of agency is actually letting go. And in this moment, letting go of knowing, because there's actually a kind of a trusting the feeling.
Mm-hmm.
And so to be able to rationalize the experience cognitively actually isn't serving this moment. The bit
Yeah.
that's actually serving this moment is the soulfulness of the experiences that you are having, that coaching
Mm-hmm.
is giving you, but the impact that you are creating on others. And I and I really I'm drawn to this idea of like leaps of faith and just not knowing and going
Yep.
anyway and seeing what happens.
Yeah.
And wrestled with that with some guests, because some guests are like, nah, don't believe in leaps of faith. It's this, and this, and the others, and
Oh.
others are like, oh my god, I totally been it, you know. And wherever you sit on that, it's interesting that when we started to talk about soul and soulfulness, we use this word agency, which ultimately can mean control, but there's a paradox in it of
Mm,
let go. Let
yeah.
go and you feel more agency.
Well, is it something like the willingness to be led?
Mm.
Um,
And
and
led by what?
yeah, well, that maybe that's the destiny piece, right? The
Yeah.
fate is like the imprint we were given and the impulses we have, and then destiny is what's leading us.
Mm.
And yeah, I think you're so right. There's this like aspect of being surrendered
Yeah.
to life. Poet David White says, cynicism is the refusal to be surprised by life. And I can't think of a more poignant way to express that. And frankly, the clients that I struggle with most and where I sometimes as a coach feel I haven't quite cracked the nut is in helping someone become surprised by life.
Yeah.
Helping someone see that a pattern that's familiar is actually evolving
Mm.
and that there are differences this time, and that the willingness to um, suspend what one anticipates will happen is where change occurs.
Mm.
And that takes a degree of humility that I think sometimes we only learn when life knocks us around.
Yeah. And at a really rudimentary level, I believe there's a deep amount of cynicism that comes from a sense of control,
Mm-hmm.
and you know the kind of the idea of surrender is terrifying. So I don't want to be surprised by anything. So I'm going to lock it down and lock it down hard.
That's right.
Um, I'm um, I'm reading a book at the moment called The Bright Side by Sumit Paul Chowdhury, and it's a book of optimism. It's a book about
Mm,
optimism, and Daniel Pink in the and one of the kind of the quotes of reviewing it was like, this takes the idea of optimism from something woolly to a hard edged. I forget the word he used. I don't have it with me. It's downstairs where I read. Um, but it's really wonderful in this book how they are looking at um, pessimism and realism and optimism and seeing the contrast. You know, you used the word contrast before. Uh, they're all ways of being able to rationalize out the world, but there is a
mm-hmm.
sense of choice in how you want to perceive the information, the data that's coming to the fore. And so, yeah, there's something really rich in this idea um, of being able to see the nemesis, which
Yeah.
is, wow, what you're holding on to in your worldview is really difficult for me to, because the leap of faith isn't there, because I don't want to be surprised. And
Mm-hmm.
how do you bring hopefulness well, hopefulness is about the leap of faith, actually. That's kind of part of the definition within the book. The optimism is actually a rational experience. So how do you bring a bit more optimism to the pessimist? That feels compelling.
One of my teachers, Kyle Cease, had he does these like channeled meditations and talks, and one of them in May was about allowing yourself to be hopeless. And in coaching one of the students in his community, um, he was helping her see that her attachment to the belief that things will always get better is actually a kind of violence against her soul or against the younger part of her who was being told, you're not allowed to feel hopeless. You're not allowed to feel despair. You're not allowed to feel sad or abandoned. And so I haven't read the book yet, but what it's making me think of is, how even when we believe something better is possible, it can be kind of an addiction to getting away from the feelings of being powerless or the feelings of being, just deeply vulnerable to life. And, there's a way that we do that to ourselves.
Yeah.
We learn how to do that to ourselves to manage the pain. And then the choice with, a certain level of spiritual maturity becomes allowing those things to surface and allowing them to be held in a way that they were never given permission to do before.
And
The
it feels like
example he gave, and since you're a dad, I had to bring this up. He always uses his daughter as an example. I think she's like 4 or something like that. And he said, well, imagine if she were crying and she came to me saying, Daddy, I'm upset. And I said, don't worry, sweetheart. It's going to get better. Time heals all wounds. Imagine, like, that's actually kind of a way of shutting your kid up. It's
Yeah.
not really holding the space for the upset to come forward, and to be metabolized. And so that's how we end up with bodies full of unprocessed emotions that become disease. It's just that we're sort of keeping the lid on the stirrings of our own soul. And I think what's beautiful about the time we're in now is that so many more people are waking up to this, and the science is supporting it. And there are people like you who are using their platforms to open people's minds and clear the horizon, that will allow us, hopefully, to become more spacious and more like surrendered, I guess is the word again, to the parts of ourselves that have not been heard.
Yeah, agreed. And I think there is something here really important, which speaks to this kind of uncovering experience and how the uncovering is never really over. Because for sure, I have found becoming a parent one of the most powerful self-development experiences of my life, in that when you start to see the impact of who you are in the world reflected back at you in these creatures that you adore more than anything else, there is a sense that I use that word responsibility to how you show up, and that's really not very easy, right? That's not very easy at all. And this idea of not wanting to close your child down at the same time as acknowledging the reality, which is they can get pretty manipulative pretty fast in terms of what they want, and your kind of role as a parent to guide them through the world and create the kind of the right kind of boundaries so they understand how and where they can feel safe and how and where they can touch the edges, etc. It's hard. It's hard to figure your way through. Every kid is different. I only have 2, and they are both really different when it comes to those things, and trying to navigate in between them in the same moment because they're both kicking off about the same thing in an entirely different way, while being tired, or no, I'm not even going to use that. I'm not even going to use that. While because it's easy to turn around and go, like, I'm tired too and not always at my best, blah blah blah. That's all kind of justification for something that's at the side. Not knowing how to do it, right? That's the real answer. Is like not knowing what to say for the best, not knowing how to navigate this in a way that doesn't cause some kind of dysfunction. Just trying to kind of be in the moment and navigate the moment as best you can. And so you throw all of that into the mix. You throw all of that into the mix, and all of a sudden you have a cauldron where you can see how people can get it wrong honestly. Like that even in the example that you chose, which is that sense of, everything is going to be okay. There's like a desire for reassurance, because sometimes your little people are looking at you with a fear of what they've experienced, and they want to feel secured and nurtured and protected, and that everything is going to be okay. But there is a difference, contrast. There is a difference between where you may choose that and the moment that you use that, and the moment where you might just go, well, actually, we need to be in it for a while. And knowing the difference between those two things, that's hard.
Yeah. And I'm not a parent, but one of the things that tempts me about parenthood is that experience of just being like blown away and made speechless by some kind of crazy existential question that your kid hits you with at like 7 a.m. on a Saturday. Whether it's like, Daddy, why do good people do bad things? Or,
one of our guests on the podcast, actually, she talks about one of her earliest memories. So she was like 3, and her mum tells this story, is that she just turned around to her mum one day as they're walking along going, what's it all about then? And her mum went, what's what all about? And she went, life. She was like, what? 3 years old, what's it all about? Are you joking? Yep. What is life all about? Like, oh my, how do you handle that?
What is the research? I think it's like until age 7, they're in like a delta wave state. They're like they're like little monks walking around with like no filter. It's so cool. But I wonder, like, what would happen if a parent didn't rush to answer the question and just said, wow, I don't know I don't know the answer to that. You just asked to, you stumped me.
Alexa, what's the maybe. And there is everything that's wrong with the world.
I don't know why this made me think of a work experience I had. I felt so confused. I was on this really intense project. It was the second to last project I did at Mackenzie before I left. And it was, I think, a 4 or 5 week due diligence for a private equity firm. We were trying to understand an asset that they wanted to acquire in the market and the value of that. And it was insanely intense. And it was the first time I was managing that type of project. Even though I was knowledgeable about the industry, I hadn't worked in private equity in that space. And I was very upfront about that when I started the project with the associate partner above me. And I said, I'll need some additional support to make sure that I have the tools I need to run this really smoothly and get set up for success. And the whole thing went a little bit sideways. The clients had a good experience in the end, and nothing went terribly, but it just wasn't smooth, and people were extremely exhausted. There were 4 a.m. nights routinely, and it was not a well-run project. What I discovered toward the end, through someone not on the team who kind of confided in me, was that no one in the leadership team had done this particular project before. And so I was the only one who actually said, I don't know what I'm doing here. I'm going to need some extra support. And instead of the leadership team coming together and saying, hey, we're serving this client for the first time. We don't quite know what we're doing yet. We're going to give each other extra support. You have, one person thinking that she's not doing enough and doesn't understand why things aren't going well, and other people who are trying to cover. And I think we would do better maybe as people in the workplace, as parents, as humans, if we just acknowledge where we're learning and
Yeah.
invite others into the process with us.
Yeah.
Um, I think in that situation, I would have felt safer.
Yeah. The irony, right? The
Counterintuitively,
irony.
I would have
Yeah.
felt safer if the guy above me said, hey, I actually don't know what I'm doing here either. How can we help
Yeah.
each other?
Yeah.
The week before we started. And so I wonder, yeah, what are those moments in parenthood or in the workplace where we actually create a possibility for something better by acknowledging what isn't there, or acknowledging the need for participation and
Mm.
co-creation.
Yeah, it's like the levels here around this idea of openness and what that asks of us. You talked before about the kind of the experience of those kind of high achievers and this sense of permission and some stuff they haven't owned. And I guess it goes back to this kind of sense of responsibility, which is what do we need to own within ourselves? What is the unmet need that we are not willing to accept or see or own, that actually becomes the limiting factor in all of this? And I'm really blessed. My wife is, and I have the kind of relationship where I can go, I'm kind of nowhere in this. I don't understand. And
Yeah.
when she comes out with something in response to a situation or a circumstance that our children are kind of navigating through, and I'm like, how did you get there? Like, where did that come from? Like, what does that look like? And vice versa. Less so on my part. She definitely does that far more optimally than me. But in both cases, we sit down and we have that conversation, and it's making me sit and think, like, how often does that occur in a work context, in a work environment? And I know for myself, I have learned over my career, who are those people? Like, who are those people that when you are confronted with the realization that you are nowhere, that you can just go to them and say, okay, I have set myself up here and I've set myself up hard, and I am desperate for
Yeah.
some support here, because I'm if I muscle through this, the cost to me and the cost to them, it's
Yep.
too great. It's too
Mm-hmm.
great. It's not worth it.
Yeah.
And because multiple 4 a.m.s, was the cost worth it in the end?
Yeah.
Like, that's the question, right?
Right. And I think the challenge in consulting is that there's such a velocity
Mm.
in the projects that you do. So, like, you might be doing something new 4 weeks from now or 12 weeks from now. And so there's this short termism that takes hold. And people think, oh, I'll just like grit my teeth and bear it for the next few weeks. Like, I can do anything for 4 weeks. But the problem is that, no one ever gets better, and those patterns just get cemented because that's how you're training yourself to operate, and you're just going to take that to the next team.
Yeah.
And when everyone is operating that way, you have a company that just spits out people every 1.5 to 2 years, I think is the average tenure. But
Yeah.
it's actually, in the consulting industry, it's to a degree by design,
Mm.
because alumni of those firms become clients in the future, sort of like an executive factory.
Yeah. Yeah.
The problem is, if those people leave and they didn't have a great experience and they're burnt out, and it takes them like 5 years to sort of reconcile that, they're not going to be clients very
Yeah.
soon.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think, and this has been a theme in my life as well, and to I'm still learning that humility and the surrender is, and I spent, I don't know if you count university, probably like 10 years in academia and then 6 years in management consulting. And in both of those worlds, everyone is trying to be the smartest person in the room.
Yeah.
And we don't get to the best answers when everyone thinks they're the smartest person in the room because you're not open to new information.
Yeah.
You're not allowing yourself to be surprised by life. And so
Yeah.
in a room
Yeah.
full of cynics, like you can only go so far. So I think the most mature and growth oriented thing that we can ever say is, I don't know yet.
Yeah.
You know?
And again, the sum of the parts, right? Those things are just still the parts, aren't they? There
Mm,
is no sum of, like, the square root of a whole bunch of people that all want to be the smartest person is less than
yeah.
the group of people who are not striving to be the smartest and are open to acknowledging that they don't know yet. And
Yes.
so the very opposite of what that group of people are trying to attain is actually present, or so the thing that that group of people are trying to attain is present in the group of people that are willing to turn around and say, I don't know yet.
Mm-hmm.
um, uh, and I think that for me is always the magic of the kind of the soulful, like that is winning deep, as Pippa Grange would say. And if you haven't come across Pippa Grange,
Winning deep.
fear Fearless is her book. She was on Brené Brown's podcast. It's an absolute gem to listen to. And she talks about winning shallow versus winning deep. And that
Mm,
kind of principle and context of winning deep speaks to our soulfulness for sure. In fact, I saw a conversation that she was kind of stimulating on LinkedIn about soul set. So the progression of mindset, like beyond mindset, you've got soul set. Like, what's the orientation of your soul to the world, and how does that
mm.
influence who you are and how you show up? I was that, just magic.
Beautiful. Okay, I had
And
to look that up immediately. That's
it's
where I'm going next. It's kind of like Simon Sinek's The Infinite Game, right? Like there's never actually an end to
mm,
what we're doing. So in some ways it gives the lie to the zero sum mentality because the game isn't over.
yeah,
And so I think that's something, hopefully management science will learn this, that the world isn't zero sum, and
mm,
that competition is sort of it's sort of a myth. And if you really want to win outsize returns, Alex Hormozy would say you want to be a market of one. You want to be
mm,
so distinctive that no one can compete with you, and that customers would be stupid not to buy your thing. and and yet we're in this world of like, you know, marginal distinction
yeah,
between almost identical things that's not actually creating an abundance of value for people.
yeah.
And there we come to scarcity versus abundance, which is the disease of our time.
Well, also the thing that gives me great hope is that nothing is going to ever be able to know more than AI. So you crack on, continue to be the person that has to know everything, because you are going to be gone fast,
Mhm.
and faster than you could ever possibly imagine. So either
That's
open
right.
yourself up to the possibility of not knowing, and then embracing the thing that
That's
does know,
right.
and allowing that to be able to metabolize and multiply the quality and depth of your impact, or see you later. Because
Hmm.
everybody else is playing a different game now, my friend.
That's right. There's a
You are
soul
gonna
set.
you are gonna be playing the game of one over there, but it's not gonna be multiples in return. It's gonna be, retirement.
Oh boy. Yeah, no, it's
uh,
like I don't know why people are so scared of this tool. Like it's only it's only going to help us if we learn how to use it. Um, and if we lean into the things that will always be irreducibly human. Um, maybe it's scary because now we actually have to take EQ seriously and not just talk about it. Or we
yeah,
have
yeah.
to now take culture seriously and not just drone on about it like we've done for 20 years, not really
Mm,
making any changes to how companies operate, right?
yeah.
Um, yeah, It's an interesting time, both of us being on LinkedIn and just seeing the amount of like AI produced drivel on social media.
Yeah.
It's very discouraging as someone who loves to write to see like AI has now digested and is vomiting up like syntax and phrasing that used to be interesting writing. It's now
Yeah.
like so repetitive and derivative. And yeah, I think we're all going to have to up level and you know tap deeper into that infinite creative source within each of us
Yeah.
and start to sing our own song and not just recycle what we've seen out there.
Wow. I mean, I feel like I'm going to pause our conversation there, genuinely, just to kind of
Yeah.
underline that moment, because that just feels like it kind of almost creates a summation of the journey that we've been on, which is in no way, shape, or form the normal journey that we have
I
on
know.
our podcast. Like
What kind of
we're,
table
we're
is this? It's a spaceship.
and I think part of the magic of that was just kind of jumping off into this conversation about the soul and soulfulness, and
Mhm.
like it's something that you and I experience differently, have come to in different ways, but ultimately creates a sense of kind of alignment in worldview to some degree, and being able to kind of wrestle with that and talk about that, and how that shows up in different places, and then come back right now to this sense of almost requirement to level up, to be able to take a sense of kind of responsibility and agency over what just makes us deeply human, and
Mhm.
not be frightened of something that feels like it's going to come and change our world. Good. There's plenty of stuff that can be changed. And
Yeah.
actually, it is upon us to think about how do we want to be in this moment, and how does this moment shape the future history. When we look 5 years from now, we look back and we're connecting the dots. What do we want to see? Because
Mhm.
that's within our gift. And
Yeah.
it's going to be a forcing function for some levels of responsibility that have been paid lip service over the course of the last 20 years, for sure. So
Mhm.
yeah, thank you for just kind of landing us so beautifully there with that kind of underlined final thought almost.
Awesome.
And thank you very much for just being with us and being open to the nature of the conversation and
So
allowing it just
fun.
to kind of emerge. It's been mega.
Awesome. I really enjoyed talking to you too.
Thank you for taking the time to listen to the Excitable Soul podcast. We appreciate your support and would love you to subscribe, rate, review, and recommend if you can. It makes a massive difference. Equally, if you're interested in uncovering, understanding, and unleashing your unique sense of purpose, or that of your teams, come and explore our purpose immersion programs at theexcitablesoul.com. We look forward to hearing from you there or being with you on our next episode. Have an incredible day.